Derek Calloway stood at his kitchen window, watching the rain streak down the glass in long, trembling lines. He was 42 years old and had survived things that would break most men: 2 tours of service overseas, the collapse of a business partner, the slow erosion of a marriage he had believed in completely. He carried all of it quietly, the way certain men do, holding it in the rigid posture of someone who had learned long ago that falling apart was not an option the world would reward. He gripped his coffee mug and turned toward the kitchen table, where his daughter sat. Madison was 15, pale in the way that teenagers sometimes get when something invisible is pressing on them. She had moved in with Derek and his wife, Renee, about 3 months earlier. The official explanation had been adjustment issues at her previous living arrangement, a careful phrase Renee had used that Derek had not pushed back against at the time. He wished now that he had. Because Madison had not spoken a single word in 3 months, not to Derek, not to Renee, not to teachers, classmates, or the school counselor who had called twice asking about her progress. She communicated in slow nods and small shakes of her head, and even those felt like they cost her something. Derek sat across from her now, watching her stir her cereal without eating it. Her green eyes tracked the spoon in small circles. There was something behind those eyes that he recognized without being able to name it. He had seen the same hollowness in young soldiers after certain kinds of experiences. The kind of damage that does not show up on the outside until you know exactly what to look for. "Madison," he said gently, "you know you can tell me anything. Whatever happened before you came here, I need you to know that I am on your side." She flinched. It was barely visible, just a small tightening around her jaw, a slight drawing in of her shoulders. But her eyes darted toward the ceiling, toward the sound of the hair dryer running upstairs, and that small movement told Derek more than any words could have. She was not afraid of him. She was afraid of who might overhear. Derek ran a private security firm he had built from nothing after leaving the military. His company handled corporate investigations, executive protection, and threat assessment for clients who paid well for the kind of discretion and precision that most firms could not offer. His entire career had been built on one skill: reading situations that other people had convinced themselves were normal. And this situation was not normal. Renee came downstairs a few minutes later, her auburn hair styled perfectly, her smile arriving before the rest of her face seemed ready. She kissed Derek on the cheek and set her coffee cup in the sink without rinsing it, the way she always did, and then turned toward Madison with an expression that looked like warmth but felt, to Derek, like something rehearsed. "Morning, sweetheart. Try to talk to your dad today, okay? This silent treatment is getting a little old." The words were gentle, reasonable, even. But Madison's spoon stopped moving and her breathing changed, and Derek watched his daughter shrink 2 full inches in her chair without moving a single part of her body. He filed it away. He filed everything away. That night, after Renee left for what she called a book club that Derek had quietly confirmed did not exist, he sat alone in his office with the lights low. He pulled up the security logs from the front door camera. He reviewed the timestamps on Renee's recent absences. He thought about his daughter's green eyes and the direction they moved every time a floorboard creaked upstairs. Something was wrong in his house. He did not know the shape of it yet, but Derek Calloway had built a career on finding shapes in darkness, and he had never once looked away from what he found. He was not going to start now, what she was carrying. 3 days passed before Derek found the opening he had been waiting for. Renee announced another evening out, this time with colleagues Derek had never heard her mention before. She left in a cloud of perfume and nervous energy, brushing Madison's forehead with a kiss that made the girl go completely still, the way a small animal goes still when it senses danger. Derek waited until the sound of Renee's car had fully faded down the street. Then he walked into the living room and sat across from his daughter, leaving enough distance between them that she would not feel cornered. "She's gone," he said quietly. "It's just the two of us, And whatever you're carrying, Madison, I can see it. You don't have to carry it alone anymore." Madison's lower lip trembled. Her hands opened and closed in her lap. She looked at the front door, then at the window, then back at Derek, as though she were calculating the distance to every exit in the room. Derek recognized that calculation. He had taught it to himself in other circumstances, a long time ago. "I'm not going to tell anyone what you tell me before you're ready," he said. "But I need to understand what I'm dealing with. I can't protect you from something I can't see." The word protect seemed to unlock something deep inside her. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper roughened by months of disuse. "Dad," she stopped, swallowed. "There's something I have to tell you." "I'm listening." "Renee and a man named Garrett. They've been together for a long time before I moved here." She paused again. "I found out by accident. I wasn't supposed to know. But I saw them and they saw me see them, and after that everything changed." Derek kept his expression completely still. He had learned that in the field, how to listen to devastating information without letting his reaction contaminate the telling of it. He did not want Madison to stop. "What happened after they saw you?" he asked. "Garrett said that if I told you, things would go badly for me, that he knew people, that a girl my age could find herself in a lot of trouble very easily." Her voice fractured on the last word. "And Renee said she would choose him over both of us if I ruined what they had. She said I was being dramatic, that I didn't understand adult things." Derek stood up slowly and moved to the window. The street outside was quiet and ordinary. A neighbor walked a dog past the streetlight. A porch light blinked on across the road. Everything looked perfectly, unbearably normal. "Is that why you stopped talking?" he asked without turning around. "Garrett said that if I couldn't be trusted to keep quiet, then maybe I shouldn't speak at all." A long silence. "And Renee agreed with him." Derek turned around then. He studied his daughter's face for a long moment, memorizing the exact texture of what had been done to her, filing it into the part of himself that would not forget and would not forgive. "Madison, are you angry at yourself for telling me?" She shook her head quickly. "Good." He walked to her and crouched so that he was eye level with her, the way he used to when she was small and the world felt too big. "You did the right thing. You did the only right thing. And I need you to know that no one will threaten you again. I promise you that on everything I am." Madison nodded once, and for the first time in 3 months something shifted behind her eyes. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. But the faintest edge of relief, the first breath after a very long time underwater. Derek squeezed her hand once, then stood up and walked to his office. He closed the door behind him and sat down at his desk in the dark. There was a great deal of work to do. Derek did not sleep that night. He sat at his desk with the methodical calm of a man who had learned the hard way that anger, unless it was channeled with precision, was just destruction wearing the wrong target. He had lived through enough to know the difference between reacting and responding, and what Madison had told him demanded a response that was careful, thorough, and permanent. He started with what he knew, a name, Garrett. Using the databases his firm subscribed to for legitimate corporate investigations, Derek began pulling records. It took him less than 2 hours to identify the man. Garrett Fenwick, 36 years old, personal trainer, certified in 3 disciplines, currently employed at the same fitness studio where Renee had held a membership for over 2 years. Derek looked at the photograph attached to the studio's staff profile. He recognized the type immediately. The kind of man who moved through other people's lives like a tenant who never intended to stay, taking what he needed and leaving damage behind that no one fully understood until much later. He kept digging. What emerged over the following hours was not the profile of a man who had simply gotten involved with a married woman. It was the profile of a pattern, court records from 2 other counties. A civil suit filed by a woman named Dana Hollies, in which she alleged that Fenwick had encouraged her to transfer money from a joint account during a separation proceeding that he had helped engineer. The case had been settled out of court with sealed terms, but the filing itself was public record, and the details were damning enough. Before Dana, there was a woman named Carol Vance, whose ex-husband had filed a police report alleging that Fenwick had intimidated the couple's teenage son into recanting testimony during a custody dispute. The son had been 14 at the time. The report had been filed, investigated briefly, and quietly set aside due to lack of corroborating evidence. Derek read that last detail twice, then he set it aside and kept working. He found text messages through Renee's cloud backup, which she had inadvertently linked to a shared family account when they first upgraded their phones 2 years ago. The messages painted a picture that was both worse than he had imagined and exactly as bad as his instincts had told him to expect. The affair had been running for nearly 2 years. In dozens of exchanges, Renee and Fenwick discussed Derek in terms that were contemptuous and calculating. They discussed his insurance policies. They discussed the value of the firm he had built. They discussed what Renee's share of the assets would look like in a divorce proceeding that they had apparently already consulted a lawyer about, without Derek's knowledge. Derek saved every message. He copied them to 3 separate encrypted drives. He saved them to a secure cloud account that had no connection to anything in Renee's name. Then he created a second folder and titled it Madison. In that folder, he began documenting everything Madison had told him, exactly as she had said it, with timestamps. He added notes on her behavioral changes that he had personally observed over the 3 months she had been in the house. He flagged the specific dates on which Renee had been present when Madison showed the most visible signs of fear. He attached the phone records showing calls between Renee and Fenwick that corresponded to those same dates. By 4 in the morning, Derek had the outline of a case. Not a perfect case. Not yet, but a foundation. The kind of foundation you could build something lasting on if you were patient and precise. He closed his laptop and walked down the hall to check on Madison. Her door was slightly open. She was asleep, genuinely asleep, for what looked like the first time in months. The lines of tension that had aged her face by years were gone in sleep. She looked 15 again. She looked like his daughter. Derek stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he walked back to his office and got back to work. Patience, precision, and not a single step taken before the evidence was ready to hold weight. That was how you won something that actually stayed won. The following week, Derek reached out to someone he trusted. Nora Vasquez had been a licensed family law attorney for 20 years. She had also been Derek's closest colleague in the years after he transitioned out of the military and into the private sector. She was sharp, ethical, and completely unflinching, the kind of person who had seen enough manipulation and dishonesty in her work to recognize it instantly and respond to it without sentiment. Derek met her for coffee on a Thursday morning and walked her through everything he had found. He did not editorialize. He did not describe how he felt. He simply laid the material on the table between them, folder by folder, and let her read. Nora read for a long time. "The financial communications are strong," she said at last, tapping the folder. "The messages about the accounts and the insurance policies are going to be relevant in any divorce proceeding. Combined with the pattern you've documented around Madison's behavioral changes, this supports a credible case for custodial interference and emotional intimidation of a minor." What about Fenwick's threats to Madison directly? Madison would need to provide a statement. A formal one with a child advocate present. "I know a forensic evaluator I trust completely, a woman named Dr. Carol Brent, who specializes in exactly these kinds of situations. If Madison is willing to talk to her, what she says will carry significant weight." Derek nodded slowly. "Madison's been talking more since she told me, a little more every day." That's important. The return of voluntary speech after a period of trauma-induced silence is something Dr. Brent will document carefully. It supports the narrative of what happened and what caused it. They spent 2 more hours going through the evidence in detail. Nora flagged 3 additional items Derek had not yet obtained but could legally request. Renee's financial account activity from the past 24 months, the records of a law firm in the neighboring county that had apparently been consulted about divorce proceedings, and the calendar data from Renee's phone, which Derek had legitimate access to through the shared family account. "There's something else," Derek said near the end of the meeting. He pushed the last folder across the table. It contained the records he had found on Fenwick's previous conduct, the civil suit involving Dana Hollies, the police report involving Carol Vance's son. Nora studied the documents for several minutes. When she looked up, her expression had shifted. "This isn't the first time he's done something like this," she said. "No, it's at least the 3rd time I can document. There may be more." "I have a contact at the county prosecutor's office," Nora said. "Not a favor, not a shortcut. Just someone I can alert to the fact that a pattern exists across multiple jurisdictions, so the relevant offices can decide whether there's enough to open a review." She closed the folder. "That decision belongs to them, but they should have the information." "Agreed," Derek said. He drove home that afternoon with something he had not felt in weeks. Not relief exactly. Not yet. It was something quieter and more serious than relief. The settled clarity of a person who knows that what they are doing is right, and that if they do it carefully enough, it will hold. When he walked in the front door, Madison was at the kitchen table with her homework spread around her. She looked up. "How'd it go?" she asked. Derek hung his jacket by the door. "Good," he said. "We're building something that's going to last." Madison held his gaze for a moment, then nodded and looked back at her work. She did not ask for details. She had inherited enough of his instincts to understand that some processes needed space to complete themselves. Derek sat down across from her and opened his laptop. There was still more to do. When the walls began to shift, Renee noticed something had changed. Derek could see it in small ways at first. The way she would pause in the middle of conversations to search his face. The way her smile arrived a half-second too late when he came home in the evening. The way she had started checking her phone, and then setting it face down on the table in a single practiced motion. He gave her nothing. He had learned in the field that the moment an adversary suspects they are being observed, everything they do becomes performance rather than truth. The most important intelligence comes from the period just before that shift, and then again from the period just after, when panic sets in and people begin to make mistakes. Renee was approaching the second period. On a Tuesday night, Derek came home to find her in his home office, standing at his filing cabinet with one drawer pulled open. She startled badly when he appeared in the doorway, and the explanation she offered, something about insurance forms for Madison's school, was smooth and immediate in the way that only rehearsed explanations are. Derek accepted it without comment. He thanked her and pointed toward the kitchen drawer where the insurance papers had always been kept. He watched her push past him with a thin smile and a forehead that was damp at the temples despite the temperature being entirely comfortable. After she went to bed, Derek checked the cabinet. Nothing was missing, but the files had been moved. Not much. Just enough to confirm that she had been looking for something and that she had not found it because Derek had moved the most important documents to his office at the firm 2 weeks earlier. He also confirmed, by reviewing the monitoring software that his firm routinely used for corporate clients, and that he had now deployed on the home network with a clear legal right to do so, that Renee had made several long phone calls in the past week to a number registered to a civil attorney in a neighboring county. She was not just maintaining the relationship with Fenwick, she was accelerating a timeline. Derek called Nora that same night. "She's moving," he said. "How soon?" "Unclear, but we should assume sooner than we planned." Nora was quiet for a moment. Madison's statement to Dr. Brent is scheduled for Friday. That's the critical piece. Once that's on the record, the rest of the case stands on its own. I know, I'm not suggesting we rush. Good, because rushing is how solid cases crack. A pause. How is she doing, Madison? Derek looked down the hallway toward his daughter's room. The light was on under her door. He could hear the faint sound of music, something she had started playing again for the first time in months. She's returning, he said. It was the simplest and most accurate thing he could say about it. Madison was returning to herself, not all at once, not in a rush, but steadily, the way certain things recover, slowly and without fanfare, and with a kind of quiet determination that was more moving than any dramatic comeback could have been. Then protect that, Nora said. Keep her steady, keep her safe, let the process work. Derek agreed and ended the call. He sat at his desk for a while longer, reviewing the documents one more time. Not because he had missed anything. He never missed anything. But because certain kinds of responsibility require you to look at what you are carrying and confirm, again and again, that you are still capable of carrying it. Madison's session with Dr. Carol Brent lasted 3.5 hours. Derek sat in the waiting room of the Family Services building for all of it. He had a legal pad and a pen, and he used neither of them. He sat with his hands on his knees and watched the clock and tried to remember how to breathe at a normal pace. Dr. Brent appeared in the doorway at the end and asked Derek to come in. She was a composed woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses perched on her head, and the unhurried manner of someone who had sat with difficult truths long enough that they no longer unsettled her. Madison was seated in a chair by the window. She looked wrung out but solid, the way people look after something long held has finally been set down. Madison was articulate, consistent, and specific, Dr. Brent said. Her account of the threatening communications, the instruction to remain silent, and the isolation behavior she was subjected to is well documented now and supported by the observable behavioral record. I'll have a formal written evaluation to Ms. Vasquez within 48 hours. Derek nodded once. He did not trust himself to say anything yet. Dad, Madison's voice was quiet but steady. I'm okay. I want you to know that I'm actually okay. He crossed the room and sat next to her. He did not say anything for a moment. He just let the truth of what she had said settle. I know, he said finally. I've known that for a while now. The formal complaint was filed the following morning by Nora Vasquez on Derek's behalf and on Madison's behalf, with the county family court and with the county prosecutor's office. It documented the intimidation of a minor, the pattern of threatening communication, and the coordinated effort to suppress Madison's testimony through fear. It was accompanied by Dr. Brent's preliminary findings, the documented text message record, and the cross-jurisdictional background on Garrett Fenwick that Derek had compiled. Nora also forwarded the relevant material to her contact at the prosecutor's office, who passed it along to a detective in the Family Crimes Unit named Raymond Acaffer. Detective Acaffer had worked in that unit for 14 years and had a professional reputation for taking exactly this kind of case seriously. He called Derek directly the following afternoon. Mr. Calloway, I've reviewed the material your attorney submitted. I want you to know we take the intimidation of a minor very seriously, and the pattern you've documented here aligns with complaints from other jurisdictions that we have now been in contact with. A pause. I'm going to be asking to speak with Madison, with the appropriate supports in place. Dr. Brent's evaluation is already on record, Derek said. Madison is prepared to speak with you when she is ready and with her advocate present. That is exactly the right approach. Another pause. I also want you to know that your decision to document everything through proper channels, rather than taking matters into your own hands, has made this case significantly stronger. That matters. Derek thanked him and ended the call. He sat with that sentence for a long time. Your decision to document everything through proper channels has made this case significantly stronger. It had not always been easy to stay inside the lines. There were moments, especially in the early days after Madison's confession, when the pull toward something more immediate and less patient had been powerful. Derek was not naive about his own nature. He knew what he was capable of. He also knew that what his daughter needed was not a father who acted out of rage. She needed a father who acted out of love with enough discipline to protect what he built. That was the harder thing. That was also the right thing. And it was working. The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in the fifth-floor family courtroom that smelled faintly of old paper and industrial cleaner. Derek arrived 20 minutes early with Nora and sat quietly while the room filled. He had dressed simply: dark suit, white shirt, no tie. He had learned in the military that the most confident people in any room are usually the least decorated. Renee arrived with her attorney, a sharp-featured man named Aldrich who had the practiced boredom of someone who had won enough cases to believe his record was a personality trait. Renee sat on the opposite side of the aisle and did not look at Derek. Garrett Fenwick appeared via video screen, his image crisp and slightly strange in the fluorescent light. He had been formally charged 3 days earlier with intimidation of a minor and harassment across 2 jurisdictions, and he was prohibited from appearing in person at any proceeding involving Madison. His attorney sat below the screen and spoke in low tones to another man Derek did not recognize. The proceedings were conducted with the careful formality of family court. There were no dramatic outbursts, no accusations shouted across a courtroom, just documents read into the record, professional evaluations cited by name, and witnesses speaking in measured, composed sentences about what they had observed and what they had documented. Dr. Brent spoke for 40 minutes. She described Madison's trauma-induced silence as a direct and documented response to specific threatening communications. She described the gradual return of voluntary speech following Madison's disclosure to her father as consistent with the removal of the threat source from the child's primary environment. She used language that was clinical and precise and left no room for reinterpretation. Detective Okafor spoke next. He walked the court through the cross-jurisdictional investigation, which had by this point confirmed 2 previous instances in which Fenwick had engaged in similar conduct toward the minor children of women he was involved with. He presented the text message record. He presented the financial records. He cited the civil filing from Dana Hollies' case and the police report involving Carol Vance's son. Renee's attorney attempted several times to reframe the evidence as circumstantial or taken out of context. Each time, Nora responded with the original documentation, time-stamped and cross-referenced, and each attempt to undermine it collapsed under the weight of what was actually on the record. At one point, Renee leaned toward her attorney and whispered something urgent. He listened, then shook his head once. She whispered again. He shook his head again. She sat back and pressed her lips together and looked at the table. The judge was a woman named Honorable Patricia Graves, who had been on the family court bench for 11 years. She asked precise questions and made no visible emotional reactions to any of the testimony. At the end of the proceedings, she summarized the findings in calm and careful language. The evidence documented a pattern of deliberate intimidation of a minor child by both the respondent Garrett Fenwick and the correspondent Renee Calloway. It was consistent, corroborated, and supported by independent professional evaluation. The court would be issuing a full protective order. Criminal charges would proceed separately in accordance with the prosecutor's office's independent findings. A formal custody determination protecting Madison's right to a stable and safe primary residence with her father would be issued within 7 business days. Derek kept his expression still throughout all of it. He kept it still in the hallway afterward. When Nora shook his hand and told him the outcome was as complete as she had hoped, he kept it still in the elevator, riding down alone. He kept it still in the parking structure as he walked to his car. It was only when he sat behind the wheel, alone in the quiet dark of the structure with no one to perform composure for, that he put his hands flat on the steering wheel and allowed himself one long, slow exhale. Then he started the car and drove to pick up his daughter. 6 months later, Madison turned 16. Derek threw her a birthday party in the backyard, which had never had a birthday party in it before because neither he nor Renee had been the kind of people who did that sort of thing when things were ordinary. He strung lights from the back fence to the house and grilled more food than 12 teenagers could reasonably eat, and sat off to the side, while Madison and her friends laughed too loudly and played music from a portable speaker that was set slightly too high. He did not mind the volume at all. The criminal proceedings against Garrett Fenwick had concluded 4 months earlier. He had entered a guilty plea on 2 counts of intimidation of a minor and 1 count of criminal harassment, in exchange for a sentence that included 3 years of probation, mandatory counseling, a permanent restraining order covering Madison and the children from the 2 previous cases, and the formal notation of his conduct in databases that would follow him professionally for the rest of his life. It was not the most dramatic outcome. It was not a sentence that made headlines or satisfied the part of Derek that had spent several early nights in the first week after Madison's confession imagining scenarios that were considerably less measured. But it was real, and it was documented, and it would hold. And the prosecutor had been clear that any future conduct of a similar nature would be treated as a pattern offense carrying substantially greater consequences. Renee's situation had resolved separately. She had cooperated with the family court process in exchange for a reduced evidentiary proceeding in the criminal matter, which ultimately resulted in a formal reprimand, a suspended sentence, and the permanent loss of any claim to shared custody of Madison. Her attorney had described this as the best available outcome. Nora had described it privately as exactly appropriate. Derek described it as over, which was the only framing that actually helped him. He had also, quietly and without announcement, passed the compiled documentation on Fenwick's conduct history to a journalist named Paul Merritt who covered family court cases for a regional publication. Paul had done his own additional reporting, found 2 more women with similar accounts who were willing to speak on background, and published a detailed piece 4 months earlier that had generated significant professional consequences for Fenwick beyond the legal ones. The gym had terminated his employment before the article was even published. 3 other fitness facilities in a 2-county radius had preemptively declined to consider any future application from him. Derek had not orchestrated any of that. He had simply made sure the right people had accurate information, and then allowed the ordinary consequences of accurate information to operate on their own. That was how things were supposed to work when the system was actually used. He had also reached out to Dana Hollies and Carol Vance, not to offer anything dramatic, just to introduce himself, to tell them what had happened with Madison, and to let them know that what they had experienced was now part of a documented record that had been used to hold someone accountable. Dana had cried on the phone. Carol had been quiet for a long time, and then said thank you in a voice that sounded as though she had been waiting to say it to someone for years. Derek had not expected either of those calls to affect him as much as they did. At the party, Madison found him at some point in the late afternoon and sat down beside him on the wooden bench he had dragged out from the garage. "You're doing that thing where you think very loudly," she said. He looked at her. 16 years old, her green eyes clear and direct, her voice easy and present in a way that still sometimes stopped him mid-breath when he heard it. "Sorry." "Don't apologize, I do the same thing." She picked up a cup from the table beside them and looked out at her friends. "I've been thinking about what I want to do. After high school, I might want to study law." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Or social work," she added. "Something where I can actually do something useful for kids who don't have somebody in their corner." He was quiet for a moment, You'd be good at that, he said finally. Either one. You think so? You already understand things about how people operate that most adults take decades to figure out, if they figure them out at all. He paused. You also know what it costs to stay quiet when you're afraid, and what it takes to decide not to. Madison was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think the hardest part wasn't telling you. The hardest part was believing that telling you would actually help, that it wasn't going to just make things worse. Did it help? She looked at him sideways. I'm sitting in my own backyard at my own birthday party, she said, with people who actually like me, in a house where I can say whatever I want. She leaned over briefly and rested her head on his shoulder, the way she used to when she was small, and the world felt too complicated. Yes, she said quietly, it helped. The lights strung above them swayed in a slow evening breeze. The music from the speaker played on. The sun was going down behind the fence in colors that had no name, and Derek Calloway sat in his backyard and understood that the thing he had spent so long trying to protect was not behind him anymore. It was right here, present, safe, alive. And that was more than N.